Game on?
Absolutely.
Right, hopefully everybody can hear me, and hopefully everybody is still struggling through this very interesting time. And I hope everybody likes the different view this week and the fact that I've actually put a shirt on. And for those of us who were in council yesterday, yes, it is the same shirt I was wearing yesterday, but I took it straight off last night after the meeting, the 4 hours, 10 minutes of council meeting yesterday, put my regular t-shirt back on. What have I been doing this week? Continuing on with my book on the Dornier 217 in combat, of interest for the maritime people who are checked in, brackets, Andrew Neil, close brackets. What I've been writing about this week are the operations where they launched, would you believe, radio-controlled bombs from the underneath the wings of the Dornier 217. There were two types. One was called the HS-293. One was called the Fritz X. The Fritz X was one which caused the most damage, and it did come as a surprise to me whilst I was researching this. The Germans had only just gone operational in August 1943, and had taken their aircraft ready to use them down in the south of France when we, the Allies, invaded in Salerno starting 3rd of September 1943. And the Germans thought, oh, this would be an ideal time try out our new weapons on Allied shipping. What they didn't realise was that on the 8th of September 1943, the Italians surrendered. Up until then, the Italians were going to send their warships to attack Allied shipping off Salerno, but because they capitulated on the 9th of September, they decided, oh, we'll sail from La Spezia to Malta and hand our ships over to the Royal Navy and the United States Navy because we don't want the Germans to capture them. The Germans didn't want this to happen, so the Germans attacked the Italian fleet, who the day before had been friends and now were enemies. One of these Henschel 293s hit the pride of the Italian fleet, the Roma. To cut a long story short, 3 hits were enough to cause the ship to go down by the nose and then capsize, taking 1,300 Italian sailors with it. At the same time, they also attacked her sister ship, who was the Italia, another flagship of their fleet, and caused quite bad damage to that. After turning their attentions on the Italians, they then turned their attention on the ships off Salerno with a high degree of success. And the most exciting one from a Royal Navy perspective, see if you can see that, that is the picture taken by one of the German bomb aimers of them attacking HMS Warspite. For those who are naval amongst us, HMS Warspite actually fought at the Battle of Jutland and was there off the coast at Salerno, giving protective gunfire. One of those Henschel 293s hit the side of the ship, crippling it to such an extent that it took 9 months to repair her. She was repaired just about in time for the Normandy invasions, where they did exactly the same again, put her off the Normandy beaches and used her guns to keep the Germans' heads down. But what other people didn't realise, that a lot of the ship, because it was so badly damaged, had been replaced by concrete. So that's what I've been working on this week. Again, fascinating story, which leads into what I'm going to talk to you about today. Now, I've talked about specifics in the past, so this time I've talk about why I do what I do and why I'm interested in it. And I think probably the best thing is to go back to the start when I was a young boy from years ago. I won't say how many years ago. And there used to be a chap who used to live just down the road from us, and he fought in the First World War, and he was a home guardsman in the Second World War. And he used to tell me all the stories about what went on in the village. Now, I lived at Rowlands Castle near Portsmouth at the time, and he actually said that during D-Day, the woods were full of Canadian soldiers, and we used to go down there as kids with metal detectors, and you would not believe what we discovered in the woods there. 23 German anti-tank mines, which had been actually brought off the beaches to teach the Royal Engineers of how to defuse them. An S mine, which was one of these mines where you trod in it and it then sprang up 6 feet in the air and fired ball bearings horizontally. Cat badges, more ammunition than you could shake a stick at, which used to really sort of upset my parents. It was quite incredible. But he also used to talk about the aeroplanes that crashed in the area. And he pointed out, at the end of the road, he pointed out a gap in the hedge, and that was where a Meteor of one squadron had suffered a bird strike after the war had crashed in the field there, and the firemen had cut their way through the hedge to get to the aircraft. The poor pilot was killed. He also talked about what he said was a Messerschmitt 109, which crashed just on the edge of the village, which actually didn't crash in 1940. It wasn't a Messerschmitt 109, but in fact was a Hawker Typhoon. So you can imagine, as a 15-year-old, quite excited by all this history, which was still there, and I suppose that's what sort of triggered it off. And finding the remains of these aircraft, and again, we talked about, so you talked about this Typhoon. The farmer gave us permission to dig down, and it was quite amazing what we found. We found a lot of ammunition, we found bits of aircraft. Sadly, we found a button from the pilot's uniform. And to cut a long story short, after I joined the Air Force, I took it upon myself to actually track down the family of this Typhoon pilot. And he was a Canadian, and they thought he'd been killed over Normandy. They didn't realize he'd been killed in an accident. What had happened, they'd been for a mission across to northern France in May 1944, so before Normandy, and they'd refueled his aircraft at RAF Tangmere, and he'd then taken off to go down to Herne, which is now the airport down near Bournemouth. But whoever had refilled his aircraft had put a bit too much fuel in it, and as a result, it had spilt out into the engine. The engine caught fire, and shortly after takeoff, his Typhoon burst into flames, and he was crashed and killed. Very sad, but that's the story. So that sort of gave me a little bit more interest. There was a chap at school who said he lived on a farm, and he said, "Oh yeah, there's an aeroplane crashed on my farm just outside Winchester." So full of schoolboy enthusiasm. We asked the farmer, went down there, and lo and behold, what it was a Fairy Barracuda. So there's for those of it, was a carrier attack aircraft, very, very high wings on it. Its claim to fame was it attacked the German battleship Tirpitz. And for schoolboys, it was absolutely amazing what we actually discovered in this crane. This was a hole in the ground which had been filled in near Winchester. We found the Merlin engine, we found its undercarriage legs, the sextant which the observer would use should he have a problem with navigating, the flare pistol. It was quite amazing. The whole aircraft effectively was there, all the propellers, you name it. So this Fleet Air aircraft really sort of gave me a boost to do other bits and pieces. And to cut a long story short, as a schoolboy, I dug up a Junkers 87 Stuka, a Messerschmitt 109, a Mustang, a Hawker Hurricane, a funny old thing, a Dornier 217, and a P-38 Lightning. Of those two, I'll just give you some sort of idea of what we did. This is actually one of the few bits I've got left. That is from the Mustang we dug up. It is a camera lens. The aircraft was a photo reconnaissance Mustang. Had engine trouble, bailed out. A pilot was killed, he bailed out too low, an Australian pilot. The aircraft crashed just north of Petersfield. The RAF took away most of the aircraft, but didn't take everything away. And the landowner gave us permission. It crashed right outside the front of his cottage. And we found a propeller. The first thing we actually found was that you can see the yellow tip of the propeller sticking out of the ground. A .5 caliber machine gun. The camera lens, the artificial horizon from the aircraft, and then strangely, lots and lots of bits and pieces of old cars. So what the Air Force had done, they'd take it out and then just backfill the hole. The other interesting one was a P-38 Lightning. Well, in fact, it was, again, that was a photo reconnaissance aircraft, and it was a lady in our local pub said that she remembered seeing this aircraft appear out of cloud in 1944, going vertically into the ground in the grounds of what was now a school. The headmaster allowed us to dig the aeroplane up, and it was incredible. The whole aircraft was there, and we actually even found on a tree, carved on a tree, was RAF Regiment 1944, because they were the people who actually guarded the wreck. We found the two Allison engines, all the propellers, pilot's first aid kit. The whole aeroplane was in the middle of this wood. So you can imagine that's why I got quite excited in aviation history. So for me, the logical next step really was to write about it. And the first book I wrote was called Brothers in Arms, which I probably will talk about in weeks to come if this is still dragging on and you'll wish to listen to me. But as a result of that book, I managed to contact all of the surviving members of an RAF Spitfire squadron, number 609 squadron. They were all over the world. Some were a member of the association, some were not. I contacted all of them who were still surviving, and I did exactly the same for an equivalent German fighter squadron. And the reason why I did the two was those two squadrons met in battle in the 24th and 25th of August 1940. And then at the end of the Battle of Britain, they met again in May 1941, where a pilot who was flying in 1940 from each side collided over the channel, and both were killed. So it was a good start and a good end to the book. The fascinating thing for me was to actually be invited out to Germany to the German Squadron Association. I successfully managed to put all the surviving members of that squadron, we're talking about 12, 13 pilots, of which 6 or 7 were shot down and taken prisoner in the Battle of Britain. Amazingly, they still referred to their squadron commander as Sir, even though he wasn't as successful a businessman as many of the other people in his unit. And I think, as I mentioned last time, it's the only time I've ever had beer for breakfast. But there are probably other people here, probably Andrew Neil would join in this one, and probably Beryl, who have probably regularly had beer for breakfast in their Air Force career days. So it then led me on to another book, and that was purely and simply because, again, this has a Royal Air Force Association link about it, is that my wife worked for Cotswold District Council. She worked with a chap who was much older than her, and she said, it's very, very strange. He's got these Air Force sayings, and he's a member of the Royal Air Force Association, and he's also got these German sayings. And to cut a long story short, he hadn't spoken to anybody about it. And yes, he was a flight engineer at Halifax's. He was taken prisoner in October 1943. And he had, apart from remaining in the Air Force after the war, he then left as a flight lieutenant and then working for Cotswold District Council. He had had no dealings with his former squadron, no dealings with his former squadron members. So to cut a long story short, I put him, I think I mentioned this before, I put him in touch with his pilot in New Zealand, his bomb aimer in Cornwall, and his navigator living in Kent. They only ever got together once, and that was at the squadron reunion. And I can always remember he saying to the navigator, the last time I saw you was your backside going out the front door of the Halifax. And of course, he being non-commissioned went to one prisoner of war camp, and the navigator being a pilot officer went to another, and they hadn't seen each other since the war. So I actually find this very, very satisfying, very, very interesting. And as a result, it has caused me to do other bits and pieces. I've put people in touch with each other, and I've done some interesting bit of research work. One that always particularly interested me was the crash landing of a German bomber just outside Portsmouth. Where it crash landed now is a massive housing estate. And everybody talked about it in the area, and I did a bit of investigation. And this one chap said, you should go and have a word with so-and-so. Now, he's got bits of this aeroplane. Now, the aircraft crashed intact, so there was always a very good chance of there being bits and pieces left. And I went to visit this chap, and he said, oh, yes, it's out in my shed. And what it was the oxygen bottle of the Heinkel. They were all allowed to, the civilians were allowed to help themselves to bits and pieces which weren't vital to the war effort, and use them as they saw fit. So what he did, he took this oxygen bottle, cleared the oxygen out of it, and made it into a hot water bottle. And he said, oh, 2 doors up, he said, the guy up there's got the tail wheel from it. And we went, no, this won't be it. And he actually still had the tail wheel of the Heinkel 111. He'd made it into a wheelbarrow, and the tail wheel was still in use that day. The final bit of the story on that aircraft was going to the farm, which again was then still active, but was being used for chickens. And I said, an aircraft crash. He said, oh, I know that. So he said, my father used to tell me about it, but there's nothing left. And a week later, he rang up. He said, I forgot. He said, I've got something here for you. And he said, and we went back to the farm, and what they had was the wing panel from the Heinkel 111, which had part of the cross on it, which the RAF, when they were dismantling the aircraft, had allowed his father to keep, and he used it as a roof for his chicken hutch. So, it just goes to prove that with a little bit of perseverance and a little bit of investigation and a bit of luck, you can actually find out bits and pieces. Probably the most satisfying thing I've actually done is put people back in touch with each other. You'd think that back in 1940 and 1941, there they were trying to kill each other, but it was actually entirely the opposite. The first person I put in touch was a Messerschmitt 110 pilot, in touch with the Spitfire pilot who shot him down on the 15th of August 1940. And to cut the long story short, every year on the 15th of August 1940, whilst the two of them were still alive, they used to ring each other up. The German used to say, "Thank you very much for my second birthday for not killing me." And the British pilot used to say, "Well, it's nice to meet you." And they actually exchanged badges. The German pilot was given his RAF pilot's wings, and the RAF pilot, if you can see that, was given the German pilot's wings, and each of them had that on each other's wall. And sadly, both of them died, and it was in their wills that when they passed away, that it would all come to me. For those who are eagle-eyed, and I'm trying to see if Brian Fair's on there, the badge on the right was a Czech pilot's badge, because the German pilot actually took part in the annexation of Czechoslovakia in 1938, and he was given that by a Czech pilot who also gave him his Longines pilot's watch, which now sits in my study, and my daughter, who is a great lover of watches, has her beady little eyes on it. So he was the first person I put in touch, and for those who are, again, fairly eagle-eyed, you would have seen in the news in the last week that ex-Flight Lieutenant Terry Clark has died, another Royal Air Force Association member, very, very supportive of RAFA. He died, I think, age 101. A lovely, lovely, lovely chap. He was initially a wireless operator air gunner, but then became a NAVRAD, a radar operator on the early night fighters, first starting off on Bristol Blenheims, and then ending up on Beaufighters and Mosquitoes. He had a very exciting wartime career, and he was very, very generous with his time with me. He shot down a Heinkel 111 in April 1941. I put him in touch with the pilot of that. He then shot down another Heinkel 111 in, this would be June 1941, put him in touch with the crew from that aircraft. The crew was still alive, and every year they used to invite him to their squadron reunion in Germany. He never went because he said it would have been quite weird, because he was trying to kill them in 1941, and here they were as friends. Amazingly, he still had the flying helmet of one of those crews, and he wanted to return it to him, but in fact what they did do, that flying helmet now is in the Yorkshire Air Museum at Elvington. He then went on to Mosquitoes. He shot down one more aircraft, the Messerschmitt 410. Both the crew were killed in that one, but I tracked down his pilot living in New Zealand for that. So you might have seen, if you saw his obituary, that he was in touch with a number of people who shot him down. Well, that was because of me. I actually put him in touch with each other, and it is very, very satisfying. You know, it wasn't the person they were after, it was the aircraft they were after, and what that aircraft was going to do to friends and families and cities and towns. So, you know, that's, you can understand. So from an early age, from speaking to a chap from the Home Guard to today, looking at attacks by German guided munitions on what used to be the pride of the Royal Navy, HMS Warspite. It's like a never-ending jigsaw, and you know, one of the challenges is to basically put all those pieces of the jigsaw together. But I think what we said, that, you know, the challenges of and the disappointments. Yes, there are a number of disappointments. I was researching the crash of a German bomber near Cambridge. It crashed in June 1940, just at the start, before the Battle of Britain. I was in touch with 3 of the German crew, contacted the farmer, and he said, "Oh yes," he said, "Yeah, I remember that." He said, "I had the oxygen mask, the life jackets, and the flying helmet of one of the crew. I threw it away 2 weeks ago." There was another story of a bit more successful. A German bomber crew were taken to a hospital in Essex, and somebody had told one of us researchers that the kit had been put into a storeroom from one of the crew. And one of the nurses went to check. Okay, we're talking about, you know, late 70s, early 80s. And in this storeroom, in a box, was still the clothing of this German pilot who had been looked after there. Other successes, you know, that I would say that successes outweigh the disappointments. But you know, when you do get disappointments like that, you know, or you contact somebody, or you go to a squadron reunion and a chap comes up to you and says, gets out of his top pocket, he said, "Would you like to see my my Knight's Cross?" And he takes it out of his top pocket, and it's not the Knight's Cross, it's the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. And he asked me to find out who shot him down, take him prisoner in January 1943. I find out it was an American Spitfire pilot. He was over the moon, and three months later he dies, and the family throw away everything. Now the Knight's Cross to a collector would be worth £20,000, but because it brings back, for many people in Germany, quite rightly, bad memories of a bad time. They get very, very upset about things like that. So as a result, they get thrown away. One chap I knew, he had a fantastic photograph album from the Battle of Britain, and he said, "Would you like to see it?" And in there was him entertaining a Spitfire pilot, which had landed in their airfield by accident. Lovely. Again, he was dead within 6 months, and the family threw the whole thing away. It's as a historian, to lose such fantastic things from the past is incredible. But then, you know, you will get the unusual. One German bomber pilot came to visit me, and you can't see it here, but he actually turned up with his mission clasp, he was a radio operator, his ceremonial dagger, and you've probably seen it in the back. That when he was taken prisoner, his family put everything into a box. His family were now no longer interested in what he wanted. Would I like to have it? How the hell he managed to bring a dagger, which is about that long, via aircraft through customs, I'll never ever know. But he then died about 5 years ago. The family have no interest at all, and I'm afraid that's it. You know, to give another final bit to talk about, you know, the disappointment. Those of you are probably aware, I was in touch with the daughter of the Luftwaffe's top night fighter race, a guy called Helmut Lent. Amazingly, she lives in Bexhill. She was age 2 when her father died. Her sister died the day her father died. He was not a card-carrying party member. He did not like Hitler. He liked flying. He liked combat. He was killed in an accident in October 1944. He wrote his own obituary without saying, "I died for the Führer and the fatherland," which didn't go down too well with the German hierarchy. And after the war, a barracks in the north of Germany, not far from where he's now buried, was named in his name. This week, the family were told that they, in accordance with rules and regulations within Germany, of still trying to dispose of or forget things from the last war, the Lent barracks will no longer be called the Lent barracks. It will be named after a 19th century forester who used to live in the area. The family are extremely upset, not because they were political, but it was a tangible memory of their father. And I'm afraid to say that it is, but that's that's life, that's politics, that's Germany, I'm afraid. So I hope that gives you an idea. Next week, if you want me, and if Amy wants me, no, you can stop nodding, Amy. I'll come up with something a bit more structured. But I just thought today I would give you a sort of a feel of why I do what I do, what has been successful, what has not been successful, and if anybody now has any questions on anything or wished me to talk about anything, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. We had a question through, if that'd be all right. But first of all, I just want to say how much I enjoyed those stories, and I love the idea that 15-year-old Chris was dragging bits out of the sand. I thought that was a great start to your your infamous career. So Chris, we've had a question come through. So why did you win the 2 Air Forces Award in 2001?
Are you just seeing the thing lurking behind? The 2 Air Forces, well, the Air Force sent me to university in 2001. And that was every other year. I don't know if they do it now. The Chief of the Air Staff sponsored one person to go to King's College in London to study to study war. And I wrote my thesis was on an air campaign, and as a result of that, every year between the RAF Historical Society and the United States Air Force Historical Society, they have a competition to which person, commissioned or non-commissioned, has actually written the best narrative, the best account of on air power, and as a result, that is what I won. Do I make that way? Let's do it that way. Yeah. Okay. So that's the 2 Air Forces Award, and it's a joint award between the RAF and the United States Air Force.
Thank you, Chris. We had a comment come through here from Drew. It says, thank you as always, really interesting. Your chats have become an essential fixture of my Thursdays, something that will, I'm sure, be of interest to the audience, and which seems to have been largely unreported is that yesterday was the 100th birthday of the only VC holder to reach that grand age. John Cruikshank, VC,
Cruikshank, yeah,
is well known in maritime circles, but perhaps not so much elsewhere.
There's one person who's listening in who knows a lot about him, which is Andrew Neil, because Andrew Neil commanded the squadron from which John Cruikshank came from. An amazing story, if you ever have the chance. If people got last month's Britain at War magazine, there was a very detailed account of what happened to Cruikshank. To put a long story short, he attacked a U-boat, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, again, I think we talked about this, the U-boat fought it out on the surface against his Catalina, and he suffered 70 odd different wounds, but still insisted on bringing the aircraft back home, to such an extent that it was a new aircraft, and he didn't want it to land out and be moored out. He wanted it to be beached. So not only did he then land the aircraft at Sombra, but he then taxied the aircraft in so its nose was on the beach so that it didn't sink, so that the engineers could repair it.
We've had lots of thank you messages through, Chris. So thank you from Bob, from Stephen, very interesting. He's only just spotted them, but I've sent him a link to where he can catch up on the other sessions on our website. From Steve, another Stephen, many thanks, and fascinating as always from Adi and Tracy. So I'm afraid you might have to come back next week, Chris.
But there's one more story I should tell you, actually.
Of course.
Go back to what you were saying about pulling things out of the beach. Not only did I do that, I have a brother who's 10 years younger than me. And my brother and myself, when we used to go out to these crash sites, we used to take our brother with us in his pram, and then we'd take him out the pram and make him walk back and bring back chunks of German bomber and things like that. And he's never, ever forgiven us for it. And in fact, he was only talking about it last weekend.
I love that. Just swap your brother for bits of aircraft. Thank you so much for your time, Chris. Honestly, it's very much appreciated. And your new setup looks really good. Looking at a lovely angle, and we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. I hope you've had a very interesting session and enjoyed your time here. I'll get Chris's topic off him, and that will be going in the email next week. So we'll let you know, but same time next week for Chris's session, which I think we're coming up to about week 9 or something crazy like that now, Chris.
8 or 9, I've lost count actually.
Goodness me.
It's a blur.
Tomorrow we're joined by Beryl, who's with us on the session, and she's talking all about her career with the RAF and her experiences. So that's going to be a really good session, and again that's tomorrow at 11. And if you want to find out more details, you can head to our website and find more out there as well. Thank you all so much for joining us, Chris. In tradition, we raise our mug to you. We're very grateful for your time, and see you next week.
Okay, take care everybody.